When I was 17, my entire family vanished without a word. I came home from school to an empty house and a single note on the kitchen table that read, "You're strong. You'll figure it out." The morning they disappeared. I remember that morning with a kind of clarity that feels more like a scar than a memory. The sun had barely begun to stretch its light across the cracked pavement outside our house. The birds were chirping in that oblivious way that always annoyed me, and I was late for school again. I threw on my hoodie, the same one I wore 3 days straight, and dashed down the hallway yelling something like "I'm going to need a ride," and halfway expecting someone to yell back, but the house was quiet, too quiet. Unnaturally quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. I walked into the kitchen and saw the table wiped clean, no cereal box, no dirty mugs, just a folded piece of paper resting alone, like it didn't belong there, like it wasn't heavy, like it didn't change everything. I picked it up and my stomach turned when I read it, just one sentence written in my mother's handwriting and signed by no one. It said, "You'll figure it out." My hand started to tremble, even though I didn't understand yet what that meant. I ran into their bedroom and the bed was made perfectly, as if no one had slept there in days. The closet door was open and half the hangers were gone. The drawers were empty, like the inside of a picked clean carcass. I checked my brother's room and his PlayStation was gone. His clothes were gone, the ratty posters peeled from the walls, the smell of his deodorant still faint like a ghost trying to stay relevant. I checked the garage, no cars. I ran outside, no sign of the truck or my mom's little sedan. The mailbox was open and empty, and the neighbors were sipping coffee on their porch, like nothing strange was happening, like the world didn't just erase everything I thought was stable. At first I thought maybe they were playing some twisted joke, or maybe there was an emergency, or maybe I was dreaming and would wake up any second. But as the hours passed and no one called and my texts stayed unread and my calls went to voicemail, that shaky denial began to harden into something colder, something uglier. It felt like I was falling, but there was no ground below me, just an endless stretch of sky where gravity stopped mattering. By evening I was still pacing. I hadn't gone to school, I hadn't eaten, and I kept reading that one sentence over and over, like maybe there was a second message hidden in it, maybe a code or a test or a clue, but there was nothing. It was exactly what it looked like. They had left me and they wanted me to figure it out. That first night alone was the longest night of my life. The silence in the house was so loud it felt like it was screaming at me. I kept the lights on in every room because somehow the dark felt like a lie I wasn't ready to believe yet. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my phone, the battery dying slowly, like it knew I was waiting for something that wasn't coming. I called my mom again for the 15th time, and when it went to voicemail, I didn't even bother to leave a message. I just let it ring until it cut off, then called again as if maybe the world would glitch and she'd pick up by accident. I thought about calling the police, but what was I supposed to say? Hi, my entire family vanished, and left me a cryptic note like I'm in some Netflix drama. I was 17, but I looked younger and sounded older, and I wasn't sure if anyone would believe me, or worse, if they'd try to put me somewhere. I didn't want to be, somewhere that wasn't mine. I wanted to scream, but I didn't, I couldn't. I just sat there trying to keep it together, telling myself maybe there was a reason, maybe something would make sense soon. I tried to eat something, but the fridge was practically empty, and what was left was stuff my mom bought for herself: low-fat yogurt, weird hummus, kale salad in a plastic container with her name written on it, like I would ever touch it. I grabbed a bag of chips from the cabinet and chewed with no hunger, like my body just needed something to do. I kept looking at the kitchen table, at the spot where the note had been, like it would reappear if I looked long enough. Around midnight, I turned the TV on and flipped through channels, but nothing held my attention. Everything felt fake, too bright, too scripted. I couldn't stop wondering where they were, what they were doing, whether they were thinking about me, if they even felt bad, if they missed me, if they cared, if they ever did, or if I had just been fooling myself for 17 years. Eventually, I dragged a blanket to the couch and curled up like a stray animal, too scared to sleep in the bed that suddenly felt too big, too empty, too wrong. The lights were still on. I didn't care. I was afraid of what I'd see if I let the shadows move. I kept the front door locked, the windows checked, the oven off 3 times, like if I just kept moving I could keep from falling apart. But I did fall apart quietly, like a whisper, like a slow leak. I cried without sound because it felt like no one should hear me, not even myself. I think I finally passed out around 4 a.m. with the TV still playing some rerun of a show my mom used to watch when she thought I wasn't paying attention, the laugh track echoing through the room like it was mocking me. The next few days melted into each other like wax on an overheating candle. Nothing felt solid anymore, not time, not memory, not even the ground I walked on. I woke up each morning not because I wanted to, but because the silence pressed into my chest until I gasped and sat up like I was drowning in quiet, and the air wasn't enough. I kept following the routine like a ghost, mimicking the life it used to live. I brushed my teeth without tasting the mint. I went to school because the idea of staying home again felt like trying to breathe underwater. I didn't tell anyone what happened, not really. I just said my parents were out of town and left it at that. A few people asked where I was that day. I shrugged and mumbled something about being sick. No one pushed further. No one ever does when they don't really care. At school, I drifted from class to class, barely hearing the teacher scribbling random things in my notebook just to make it look like I was part of the world. I started skipping lunch because the cafeteria made me nauseous, and I didn't have the energy to pretend to like the taste of soggy pizza or warm milk. I sat in the library instead, headphones in, no music playing, just blocking out people with noise that didn't exist. I stared at the computer screen and Googled things I shouldn't have, like what happens if a minor lives alone, or how long before someone notices a kid is abandoned, or how to become legally emancipated. Every site said the same thing: too risky, too complicated, too full of red tape and cold offices and judgmental adults with clipboards. I didn't want anyone to come looking, at least not from the outside, not teachers, not counselors, not social workers, not anyone who would make me explain what I didn't understand myself. What was I supposed to say? My family just dipped and left me behind like I was some old pair of shoes that didn't fit anymore. I didn't even tell my one sort of friend Devin, because even though we played video games sometimes and had gym together, we never crossed the line into real conversation, and I didn't want to. Start with, hey man, guess what? My family disappeared. At home, I started taking inventory of what was left, how much food, how much money, how many things I could maybe sell. Without drawing attention, I found a jar of loose change in my brother's closet and counted $46 in nickels and dimes. I found my mom's emergency cash tucked in an envelope behind a stack of books in the hallway closet. $87. I opened a bank account online under my name and told them it was birthday money when I deposited it cash only, no questions asked. I was running on survival mode now, brain sharp from fear, stomach always twisted, heart somewhere far away where it couldn't be touched. Every night, I came back to the house and walked through the rooms like maybe something had changed, like maybe it was all a mistake and they'd be there again cooking something that smelled too healthy, or arguing over nothing, or laughing at a joke I wasn't part of, but it never happened. The only sounds were my footsteps and the buzz of the fridge and the occasional creak of the floor, like the house missed them too, like it wasn't built for just one heartbeat. Weeks passed and no one noticed, or maybe they noticed, but didn't care. Maybe it was easier to pretend everything was normal. Maybe that's what I was doing too, pretending like the world hadn't cracked, like I wasn't standing in the fault line every day with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I got good at lying, not with words, but with silence, with nods and shrugs. And eye contact held just long enough to pass as okay. I paid the bills online using what little money was left in the joint account. Before it froze, I figured out how to hack the Wi-Fi when it got shut off and convinced the electric company to give me a 2-week extension. I was 17, but the world didn't care. It just asked for account numbers and dates of birth and nothing else. I stopped going to school as often, and no one really stopped me. I'd show up once or twice a week, take a few tests, keep my name on the roll just enough to not raise red flags. I used my brother's old laptop to watch YouTube videos about survival, budgeting, DIY repairs. Things adults should have taught me, things I had to teach myself. I learned how to fix a leaking faucet, how to unclog a toilet, how to fake my mom's signature when something came in the mail that needed one. I found old birthday gift cards and used them for food. Sometimes I stole small things from the gas station near my street, not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice, and because they never looked twice at the quiet kid buying a soda and walking out with pockets that jingled. I dreamed about them, sometimes not in ways that made sense, but strange shifting dreams where they were always just out of reach, walking away in a crowd or driving down a road and I was running behind them, but no matter how fast I ran they never turned around, and I always woke up with my throat tight and my hands clenched in the blankets like I was trying to hold on to something already gone. I didn't cry much anymore. It was like I ran out of tears, or maybe I didn't have time for crying. Survival didn't allow space for emotions. It required action, it required control, and control was the only thing I had left. Sometimes I thought maybe I deserved it, maybe I was too much or not enough, maybe they got tired of pretending to care, maybe I was the reason everything always felt broken, maybe if I had been a better son or a quieter brother or more normal they wouldn't have left. I tried not to think like that, but it crept in anyway like mold in the corners of my mind, and I had no one to clean it out, no one to tell me I was wrong, no one to say it wasn't my fault. But deep down, even with all the doubt and confusion, I knew one thing for sure: if they ever came back, I wouldn't be the same kid they left. I wouldn't beg, I wouldn't cry, I wouldn't run to them like nothing happened. I was changing every day, growing sharper, tougher, harder, like steel forged in fire, and I didn't know who I'd be in the end, but I knew it wouldn't be the version of me they thought they could just leave behind. I used to think my brother was the golden child, the one everyone admired, the one who could do no wrong, while I was the background noise in his highlight reel. He was 2 years older and had the charm of someone who didn't need to try. Teachers loved him, coaches praised him. My mom called him her little miracle, and my dad said he'd go far. I was just there orbiting him like some dull satellite that barely gave off light. I didn't hate him, at least not always, but there was a sharpness to our relationship, like walking barefoot on gravel. We shared a hallway, but not a world. He'd slam his door when I knocked, steal the remote, and dare me to take it back, leave me behind when he went out with his friends, and act like I was invisible unless he needed someone to blame when things went wrong. I remember once he broke our mom's favorite glass vase during some stupid wrestling match with his friend, and when she found the shards and asked what happened, he looked right at me and said I dropped it. I tried to defend myself, but she was already cleaning up, already disappointed, already believing him, because of course he wouldn't lie. Of course it was the quiet one who made mistakes, and when I cried in my room that night no one came, not him, not her, no one. They just turned up the TV to drown me out. But even with all that, I still looked up to him. Some part of me still wanted his approval, still thought maybe one day he'd say, hey, you're all right, kid. Maybe he'd take me for a drive, or show me how to talk to girls, or help me figure out how to shave without slicing my face open. But that day never came. He left first before the rest of them. I think mentally even earlier, started sleeping at friends' houses, more started locking his door like I was a stranger in my own home, and I never understood why. Until they all vanished and I realized he probably planned it, maybe not the whole thing, but he must have known something, must have helped, must have been in on the decision to leave me behind. The worst part is that I still kept hoping for a text from him even after everything, after the silence, after the note. I stared at his old contact in my phone and imagined what I'd say if he ever messaged back. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to curse him for going along with it, and part of me just wanted to ask, why not take me, why not tell me? What did I do that made them think I wasn't worth bringing along? I found one of his old hoodies in the laundry room shoved behind the washer. It smelled like him, like cologne and sweat, and something else I couldn't name. I wore it for 3 days straight like armor, like maybe if I wrapped myself in the scent I could understand something. I never did, but it didn't help. It just made me feel smaller and colder and more alone in a house full of echoes and emptiness. Going to the grocery store became an ordeal. Every time I walked through those automatic doors, my heart would race like I was walking into enemy territory. I wasn't sure what I was more afraid of, running into someone who knew me or being invisible. Both terrified me. In different ways, I'd walk the aisles with a list scribbled on the back of an old homework sheet, trying to act like I belonged, like I wasn't a 17-year-old pretending to be an adult, like I wasn't alone, like my hands weren't shaking as I counted bills before getting in line. I learned to buy only what I needed, just enough to last another few days, never more than I could carry, never anything that would raise questions. One time I saw Mrs. Carter from down the street. She looked right at me, then looked past me like I was a shadow too inconvenient to acknowledge. Her daughter used to come over for birthday parties back when my mom still pretended to care about those things, back when we still played board games and sang songs off-key and laughed, even if it wasn't real. Now I was just the kid everyone must have heard about in whispers, the one whose family left without a trace. But no one wanted to ask, no one wanted to know too closely, because knowing made it real, and real meant responsibility. Another time, an old teacher of mine stood in line behind me at the register. She asked how I was doing, and I smiled and said, "Great, just helping mom out today." She smiled back, but there was something behind her eyes, like she didn't believe me, or maybe she did but didn't want to deal with the truth. I walked out before she could ask anything else, before the questions could crack my mask. I got used to moving fast, memorizing the store layout so I could be in and out like a ghost. I stopped wearing my brother's hoodie, too recognizable, too risky, switched to a baseball cap, pulled low a beat-up jacket too big for me, and jeans that looked like they belonged to someone older, someone who had his life together, when in reality I was falling apart a little more every day. Sometimes I'd linger by the freezer aisle just to cool my face, to wake myself up, or to hold on to something that felt like control. I'd watch families bicker over ice cream flavors, or couples compare prices, or parents tell their kids not to touch anything, and I'd feel like I was on the outside of a life I used to know, like someone locked the door and forgot I was still standing on the porch. But despite the fear, despite the way my chest would tighten when someone made eye contact, I kept going because I had to, because survival wasn't pretty or heroic. It was boring and exhausting and full of little victories, like buying eggs and making them last a week, or getting to the checkout before the anxiety swallowed me whole. Winter hit hard that year, earlier than usual, and with a kind of cruel intensity that felt personal, like the universe was adding insult to abandonment. The first snow came in early November, and I wasn't ready. The heater in the house was old and temperamental, sputtering like it hated working for just one person. I wrapped myself in every blanket I could find, wearing layers inside, and still shivering like a leaf in the wind. I kept telling myself I could make it through, just a few more months until graduation, just a little longer, just hold on. But then came the power outage. It hit in the middle of the night. I woke up to silence, even deeper than usual. No hum from the fridge, no buzz from the heater, no glow from the clock. I checked my phone, low battery. I checked the fuse box, but everything looked fine. I walked outside, and the whole street was dark. No headlights, no porch lights, no sound except the wind whipping through bare trees like laughter from something cruel. I went back inside and lit a candle, shaking fingers, striking the match again and again, like it was a ritual, trying to keep the dark from swallowing me. I boiled water on the gas stove. I was somewhere else, somewhere safer, somewhere real. I knew the power might be out for a while, so I wrapped the windows in towels and blankets, stuffed socks under the doors, burned through the last of my emergency candles by morning. That day I stayed bundled on the couch, wrapped in every jacket I owned, reading an old book I found in the garage, something about surviving in the wilderness. Ironic considering I felt like I was doing the same, but with walls and a roof barely holding together. I started thinking about what would happen if I got sick, if I slipped and hit my head, if I just stopped waking up, and no one would know, no one would check for days, maybe weeks, maybe never. And then something shifted, not outside, but in me, like something cracked or unthawed or woke up. I realized I didn't want to disappear, not like that, not without being seen, not without becoming someone first. I didn't want to be the kid who got left behind and vanished. I wanted to be the person who turned all this pain into something real, something strong, something undeniable, and I didn't know what that meant yet, or how I'd get there, but the spark was lit and no power outage could put it out. I started crafting a story, not for anyone else, but for me, a version of the truth that I could live with, because the real one was too heavy to carry around all the time. I told myself they left because they had no choice, that maybe they were in danger, that maybe they thought they were protecting me, that maybe they planned to come back, but something stopped them. Maybe they were watching me from a distance, proud of how strong I was. Maybe they missed me too. Maybe they cried at night the way I used to. When the silence got too loud, I told myself things I wanted to believe, because sometimes surviving meant lying to yourself until the lie became softer than the truth. That story helped me get out of bed. It helped me brush my teeth and comb my hair and look in the mirror and pretend I was fine. It helped me go back to school a few days a week, just enough to stay on the radar without drawing too much attention. I showed up, I turned in homework, I nodded when teachers spoke to me. I became background again, but this time I chose it. I became invisible on purpose, because being seen meant risking exposure, and exposure meant questions, and questions meant collapse. But lies grow like weeds. They spread, they twist, they tangle, and one afternoon in English class, Miss Hunt asked me to stay after, and I felt my stomach drop, because I knew that tone, the one adults use when they know something's wrong but are afraid to ask directly. She said she noticed my attendance was spotty, that I seemed tired and distant, that my grades were slipping slightly. She smiled in that way that wasn't really a smile, and asked if everything was okay at home, and I felt the lie rise up like a reflex, like a shield. Yeah, I said just a lot going on with my brother and mom out of town for a bit, helping my aunt after surgery. I said it casually like it wasn't the most rehearsed sentence of my life, like I hadn't said it in my head 100 times waiting for a moment just. Like this she nodded like she believed me, or maybe like she didn't want to push harder, she let me go, and I walked out of the classroom sweating despite the cold, my heart pounding like I just escaped something that almost caught me. After that I realized the lie wasn't just protection, it was strategy, it was armor if I was going to make it, if I was going to survive, and maybe even build something out of the mess I was standing in. I had to control the narrative, I had to be the author. Not the victim, not the forgotten kid. I had to be the one who chose what the world saw, even if it meant never telling the truth. It started with a flyer stapled to the community bulletin board at the library, black letters on red paper: Graphic Design Club meets Wednesdays after school, no experience, needed free snacks. I stared at it for a long time, not because I cared about design or snacks, but because something about the words no experience needed felt like a lifeline. I didn't have a plan that day, I had just wandered into the library to kill time and stay warm, and now I was holding on to that phrase like it meant something. Like it was meant for me. I showed up that Wednesday not expecting much, just a quiet room, maybe a few nerds arguing over fonts or colors, but what I found was different. It was small, only 5 people, but there was energy in the room, the kind that made you sit up a little straighter, the kind that pulled you in even if you didn't know what you were doing there. Mr. Baines, the advisor, waved me in like he'd been waiting for me, handed me a laptop, and said, "Glad you made it." I didn't tell him I hadn't signed up, or that I wasn't even sure what graphic design really meant. I just sat down and opened the program and let my fingers move. They gave me a small task: redesign the school's holiday flyer for the winter coat drive. I stared at the screen for a long time before dragging shapes and letters around, trying different colors, playing with spacing, and suddenly hours passed without me noticing. It was the first time in months I felt focused, the first time I wasn't thinking about the empty house or the bills or the silence or the note. It was just me and the screen and the freedom to create something from nothing. When I showed Mr. Baines my draft, he smiled wide and said, "You've got a good eye, kid," and something inside me lit up, not a spark this time, but a fire, a real one, something warm and stubborn and alive. I went home that night and downloaded the free version of the software to my brother's old laptop and spent hours watching tutorials, clicking buttons and failing and trying again. I felt something shift in me, like maybe I wasn't just surviving anymore, maybe I was starting to build. I didn't tell anyone at school I joined the club. I didn't want to explain why I suddenly cared about design, or why I stayed after school on Wednesdays. I just kept showing up, kept learning, kept growing, kept chasing that fire like it was the only thing keeping me warm. And maybe it was over the next few months something strange happened. I started to feel like I had a reason to get up in the morning, not because life was easy or because the pain was gone, but because I had something that felt like mine. Graphic design became more than a hobby, it became a lifeline. Every poster, every layout, every logo I created was like a brick in a foundation I was building from scratch. I stopped thinking of myself as the kid who got left and started thinking maybe I could be the kid who built something out of it. I designed a logo for the school paper, then a poster for the spring play, then a flyer for the local coffee shop near the bus stop. They paid me in free drinks, and I didn't even like coffee, but I accepted it like currency, like proof that I mattered, that what I made had value. Mr. Baines noticed. He started giving me harder projects, started letting me help teach the others, started treating me like someone who had potential, and for the first time I believed him. I still lived alone, still counted change for groceries, still dodged questions and avoided calls, still kept the lie stitched tight around me like a winter coat, but inside that coat something was growing, a belief that maybe I could make it, maybe I could graduate, maybe I could get into a program, maybe I could make this into something real. I started researching community colleges that offered design certificate, schools that didn't care about my backstory, only my portfolio. I made a folder on my laptop and called it the future. Some nights I still heard every creak in the house, still stared too long at the place on the table where the note had been, still dreamed about voices calling me from far away, but those nights came less often, and when they did I had something to fight them with. I had color and shapes and layers and meaning. I had a way to speak when I couldn't find the words. I had design, and design didn't ask me why I was alone, it just gave me space to create. And maybe that was the first time I realized I didn't need them. Not really, not anymore. I still wanted answers, I still wanted closure, but I wasn't waiting, I wasn't frozen, I was moving. Even if it was slow, even if it was quiet, I was becoming. Tea was a Thursday afternoon, cold and gray, the kind of day that felt like a pause between breaths. I came home from school carrying a new design book I borrowed from Mr. Baines and a bag of groceries bought with leftover coffee shop credit and coins I'd scraped together. I unlocked the door and stepped inside like usual, nothing out of place, nothing new, until I checked the mail slot and saw a letter sitting there, face up, plain white envelope, my name written in my mother's handwriting. My hands froze for a second. I stared at it like it was a snake waiting to strike. Then I picked it up and held it like it might fall apart. It wasn't thick, just one sheet of paper, maybe to no return address on the front, but I flipped it over and saw it there in the corner, small and neat and unmistakable, a real address, a real place. And just like that, everything in my chest collapsed and then expanded like I couldn't breathe, and suddenly I could too much. I didn't open it, not right away. I sat on the couch holding it in my lap, staring at it, trying to understand what it meant, why now, what it could possibly say. I imagined 1,000 things, apologies, explanations, excuses, please, regret, threats, anything, everything. Maybe they were sorry, maybe they missed me, maybe they didn't expect me to survive, maybe they thought I'd fail and disappear, maybe they thought I already had. But I was here, I was still standing, and for the first time they were the ones reaching out, and I didn't know what to do with that power, didn't know if I wanted to read it or burn it or frame it or send it back unopened. I held that envelope like it held the key to everything, like inside was the truth I thought I wanted and maybe still did. Eventually, I placed it on the table in the exact same spot where they left the note, where everything ended and maybe where something else was about to begin. I opened the letter the next morning after a night of no sleep, after hours of staring at the ceiling and feeling like every thought in my head was yelling at once. I unfolded the page with fingers that didn't feel like mine and read the words in silence, hearing her voice in my head, even though I hated that it still lived there. The letter was short, too short, after everything, not an apology, not really, more like a confession, or maybe a justification. She said things were falling apart, and they didn't know how to fix it, that my dad lost his job, and my brother got into trouble, and they had to make a choice. She said we didn't leave, because we didn't love you, we left, because we didn't know how to help you anymore. She wrote that I was always strong, stronger than they gave me credit for, and that maybe in some twisted way they thought I'd be better without them, that maybe they were the weight holding me back, and letting go was their version of love. She said she's been thinking about me every day, and that she never stopped hoping I'd reach out, that she finally found the courage to send this, because she wanted to know if I was okay, if I was still here. She gave a number, and said if I ever wanted to talk she'd answer, if I didn't she'd understand. I read it 3 times, and each time it made less sense, because what kind of parent thinks abandoning their kid is an act of love? What kind of family decides one of them is better off alone? I wanted to scream, I wanted to rip the letter in half, but I didn't. I just sat there holding it, feeling the anger and sadness and confusion mix into something heavy, something that made me want to run and stay all at once. But under all that was something else too, not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but a thin thread of something like relief, because now I wasn't guessing, now I had a piece of the puzzle, even if it was a jagged piece, even if it hurt to look at it, was real, and real was something I could hold. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope, placed it in a drawer under a stack of old schoolwork, and closed it, not ready to answer, not ready to speak, but no longer frozen either, just waiting, just thinking, just breathing for the first time in a long time, with the weight of the truth instead of the silence. The letter didn't leave my mind for days. I tried to push it aside, but it followed me everywhere, in the sound of my phone buzzing with numbers I didn't recognize, in the way my reflection looked back at me like it was asking what now, in the way my hands hesitated before every click of the mouse, every line of a design project, like the part of me that was building something was being dragged back into the part of me that was design club again, not because I didn't care, but I wasn't as focused, still, because everything was all right. I gave him my usual filled with noise. I started sleeping less, eating less. He nodded like he believed me, the air like he knew better, didn't help, but chose not to. That scared me more than anything. I was grateful because design had been my escape, my fuel. Someone asked me the right question, and I was afraid I'd fall apart. I thought about calling the number 100 times, thumb hovering over the screen, never pressing send. I rehearsed things I'd say in my head. You left me, why now, what do you want? And then I delete it all, because no matter what I imagined, nothing felt like enough, nothing matched the weight of the years. They missed the nights I survived, the versions of me they never met. Pressure builds in silence, in the moments you try to pretend you're okay when you're not, and I could feel it stacking inside me like bricks, like I was being buried alive by everything I wasn't saying. I didn't know how to let it out without destroying something. So one night, I opened a new file on my laptop and started designing, not for school, not for anyone, just for me. I poured it into shapes and colors and words, bold words, hard truths, things I never said out loud. I made a poster that said I am still here in huge letters across a shattered background. I printed it and hung it on my wall and just looked at it until the noise quieted a little, and I remembered who I was becoming. The call came when I wasn't ready, when I was in the middle of frying eggs on the old stovetop, the pan spitting oil like it was angry. My phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize, and before I could stop myself, I answered it. A voice I hadn't heard in over a year filled the room like a ghost coming back to life. It was my brother, his voice deeper, now slower, like he'd aged 10 years in one. He said my name quiet, like he wasn't sure it still belonged to me. I didn't say anything, just listened, heart pounding like a drum in my throat. He said he got my contact from our mom, that she told him she'd sent me a letter, and that maybe I'd want to hear from him too. I almost hung up. I almost threw the phone across the kitchen, but I didn't, because part of me still needed to hear something, even if it hurt, even if it wasn't enough. He said he didn't know how to explain everything, that it wasn't his choice, not really, that he was just a kid too, and things got bad fast, and our parents made the call, and he went along with it because he didn't know how to fight them. He said he thought about reaching out sooner, but didn't know if I'd ever forgive him, didn't know if I'd answer, didn't even know if I was alive. And when he said that, it hit me harder than anything, because I realized they really didn't know. They left and just hoped for the best, and somehow I was still here, somehow I was still standing, and they were calling from a world I no longer lived in. I told him I didn't know what he wanted, and he said just to hear my voice, just to know I was okay, and that if I ever wanted to talk more, he'd be there. He gave me his number, and then he said he was sorry, and before I could say anything back, he hung up. I stared at the phone for a long time, like it might ring again, like he'd call back and I could scream or cry or say the million things I held inside, but it stayed quiet, and I was left with nothing but the sound of eggs burning and the weight of words that came too late. That weekend, I painted one wall of my room black. I didn't know why not at first. I just dragged an old can of leftover paint from the garage, rolled it over the cracked white surface, and watched as the color swallowed everything else. It felt like a reset, like cleansing, like I was making space for something new. When it dried, I started hanging other things, sketches, ideas, magazine clippings, white letters, with perfect scores, things that reminded me I was still building, still fighting, still becoming. I called it my wall, not just because it was made of paint and plaster, but because it held up pieces of me, pieces I refused to lose. I stopped answering unknown calls. I stopped waiting for letters. I stopped wondering if they were going to walk through the door and say they were sorry. I started focusing on my portfolio, on my future, on something real, because I realized I couldn't let them define me, not anymore. The wall became my mirror, not one that showed my face, but one that showed my worth. Every morning I'd stand in front of it and read those words like armor, I am still here, like defiance, like survival, like victory in a world that expected me to vanish, and I didn't. It started with a website late at night, glowing in the dark like a portal to something bigger, a community college, not far from me, offering a certificate in digital media design. I stared at the screen for almost an hour, reading every requirement, every detail, every word over and over like it might disappear if I blinked. They didn't ask for a long essay or an interview or a counselor's recommendation. They asked for a portfolio, proof that I could create, proof that I existed, that I wasn't invisible. I clicked apply, hands shaking, and started typing in my information, and something about putting my name down for something real, something that might lead to a future, made my chest feel tight, not with fear, but something closer to hope. I uploaded my designs, the posters, the flyers, even the one that said, I am still here. I figured if they couldn't see me in those pieces, they didn't deserve to have me in their program anyway. After I clicked submit, I sat in the silence and stared at the confirmation message like it was a new chapter opening right in front of me. It didn't feel like a finish line, it felt like a door cracking open, and I wasn't sure what was on the other side, but I knew I was going to walk through it whether I was ready or not. The last day of school felt nothing like I thought it would. No big goodbyes, no yearbook messages, no senior prank, just a cold sunrise and a walk to the building I barely recognized as mine anymore. I cleaned out my locker, which only had a few books and a crumpled flyer for a school dance I never went to. I threw it all in a plastic bag and walked the halls one last time, wondering if anyone even knew I'd survived it all. I didn't go to the ceremony, I didn't wear a cap and gown, I didn't want to sit there surrounded by parents and families cheering while I sat alone pretending I didn't care. Instead, I went home and stood in front of my black wall and looked at everything I'd put on it and whispered to myself I made it. Because I had, against all odds, against abandonment and silence and fear, I made it, and no one could take that from me, not my parents, not my brother, not anyone who left me behind. 3 weeks later, an email came in the middle of the afternoon. The subject line read congratulations, and my hands started shaking before I even clicked it. I read it once, then twice, then 3 times. I got an I was accepted into the program. I read the sentence again just to be sure, and then I laughed out loud for the first time in what felt like forever. It wasn't a big university or a full scholarship or some prestigious award, but it was mine, it was real, it was a step towards something better, something that belonged to me alone. It meant I could keep learning, I could keep creating, I could build a career out of the thing that saved me from disappearing. I printed the email and added it to the wall, placed it right under the words I am still here, like a crown, like a flag, like a promise. The first time someone paid me for a design, I almost didn't believe it. A small coffee shop near campus wanted a new logo, and I applied through a student gig board thinking it was a long shot. I met with the owner in a corner booth. She was kind, direct, and a little tired. The way small business owners always seem to be. She asked me questions. I answered nervously, but when I showed her my concepts, her eyes lit up and she smiled and said, this is exactly what we needed. She paid me in cash and gave me an extra 10 just because she liked my attitude. I walked out of that place holding that money like it was a medal, because it meant something deeper than dollars. It meant I was no longer surviving, I was creating value, I was building something real, and people were seeing it. I bought new headphones with that money, not because I needed them, but because I wanted to mark the moment, to remember what it felt like to turn pain into power, to turn loss into light. I didn't expect to see them, not together, not ever, not like this. But there they were, standing outside the coffee shop window like a photo from my old life, stepping into the one I built. I froze with a coffee in my hand, the logo I designed printed on the cup like a reminder of who I had become. My mom looked older, smaller, softer somehow. My dad stood behind her looking uncomfortable. My brother off to the side, hands in his pockets, not making eye contact. They didn't come inside, they just stood there. And when I finally walked out, they looked at me like they were unsure if they were allowed to smile. She said my name softly, like it might break if she said it too loud. He nodded and said, we've been trying to reach you. And my brother finally looked up and said, I saw your flyer, it was really good. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at them and realized something that hurt and healed all at once. I didn't need them, not to be proud of me, not to explain, not to fix what they broke. I had already become who I was without them, and that meant everything. I told them I was doing okay, that I had work to get back to, and when my mom started to cry, I didn't look away because I wanted her to see I was still standing, not in spite of them, but in spite of everything. After that day, the distance between us didn't shrink, it grew wider, like an ocean that couldn't be crossed with apologies or explanations. I stopped returning their calls, stopped answering texts, stopped opening the door. When they knocked, I realized that some things couldn't be fixed with words. Some wounds were too deep to heal overnight, and some silences were louder than any conversation. I focused on my classes, on my work, on my new life, building slowly, brick by brick, with no shortcuts or easy outs. I spent nights designing logos and layouts, practicing skills, watching tutorials, and dreaming of a future that didn't involve looking back. I still thought about them, sometimes not with anger, but with a strange mixture of pity and relief, because I knew I was free, even if it cost me everything I thought I'd ever want from a family. Friends at school noticed the change in me. Some said I seemed stronger, others said I looked like I was carrying the weight of the world, but no one knew the half of it. No one saw the nights I still cried alone, the moments I felt like a ghost haunting a house that no longer held me. But I learned to hide those parts, because sometimes survival meant looking unbreakable even when you weren't. One afternoon, Mr. Baines called me into his office. After class, he smiled like he always did, but there was something serious behind his eyes. He told me a local design firm was looking for interns. Someone had seen my work at a recent student exhibit and recommended me. He said it was a great opportunity to get real-world experience and build connections. I wanted to say yes immediately, but I hesitated thinking about the hours, the pressure, the possibility of failing in a world that didn't give second chances I wasn't sure I was ready to step into. Something so big, but I also knew this was a chance I couldn't pass up. I took the number he gave me and called that night feeling like I was stepping off a cliff, not knowing if I'd fly or fall. The voice on the other end was friendly, professional, and told me the interview was next week and to bring my portfolio. I hung up and stared at the phone for a long time, then started preparing like my life depended on it, because maybe it did. The interview day came with a sky so clear it felt like a promise. I dressed in my best shirt, the one I borrowed from a thrift store, and ironed it carefully. The walk to the firm was nerve-wracking, my heart pounding in rhythm with my footsteps, my portfolio under my arm, feeling heavier than it looked. Inside the office, people bustled with purpose, their conversations a low hum that made me feel small and out of place, but I reminded myself this was where I was meant to be. This was the next step on my journey. The interviewer was a woman named Claire who smiled warmly and asked me about my designs, what inspired me, how I worked through challenges. I told her about the graphic design club, about the flyers and logos I'd created, about the poster that said I am still here, and how it wasn't just words, but a statement about who I was. She listened closely, asked thoughtful questions, and then said she saw potential in me, and that the firm would love to have me as an intern. I felt a wave of relief and pride wash over me like the first warm day after a long winter, and I knew that no matter what happened next, I was moving forward. Internship started and reality hit hard. More work, more expectations, more pressure than I'd ever known, but also more learning, more growth, more moments that made me forget the past, even if only for a little while. I stayed late many nights, going over projects, perfecting details, reaching out for feedback, even when my body begged for rest. Early mornings became a routine. I never thought I could keep waking up before the sun to catch the bus to the office to prove I belong somewhere new. I learned to balance school, work, and internship hours, and somehow managed to keep my grades up too. Even when it felt like everything was falling apart, I kept going, because this time I wasn't just surviving, I was fighting for a future. Sometimes exhaustion hit me like a wave, and I wanted to give up, but then I'd remember that black wall with the poster, and all the pieces I'd put there to remind me who I was and what I'd overcome, and I'd push through. Just one more day, just one more project, just one more step. One night, after a particularly long day, I sat alone in my small apartment scrolling through my phone and found a draft message addressed to my mom, a message I'd started typing months ago, never finished and never sent. I read it over and over, a jumble of anger and questions and a small spark of longing. It was messy and raw and everything I felt but couldn't say. I deleted it and started a new one, just a few words this time. I'm okay, and maybe someday I'll say more, but for now that was enough, because healing wasn't a straight line. It was a messy path full of stops and starts, and sometimes just surviving meant taking the smallest step forward, even if it was just saying I'm okay to the silence. Life settled into a rhythm that felt strange, but comforting in its own way. Mornings spent at classes, afternoons at the internship, evenings working on personal projects, and weekends filled with quiet walks or movies alone. I learned to cherish small victories like a smile from a coworker or a completed design or a morning without nightmares. The hole my family left never fully closed, but it became easier to live around it, like learning to walk with a limp that was mine and mine alone. I found a few friends who saw past the surface, who didn't ask too many questions, but were there when I needed them. I learned how to trust slowly, how to let people in without breaking down walls entirely. I realized that family wasn't just the people who shared your blood, but the ones who chose to stay through the chaos and pain and growth. I still thought about the letter, the calls, the moments when I wanted answers, but mostly I focused on what I could control, on the future I was building from scratch, a life that belonged to me on my own terms, a life where I could say I am still here and mean it with every breath. One late afternoon, as I was leaving the internship, a familiar face stood waiting outside the building. It was my brother, looking different, older, but still the same, and for a moment I didn't know what to say or do. He looked nervous, hopeful, maybe even scared, and I realized maybe this time the roles were reversed. He apologized for everything, the silence, the leaving, the not trying to find me, the ways he failed as a brother and a person. He said he wanted to be part of my life again, if I'd let him, if I could forgive him, if we could start over. And I looked at him and thought about all the years lost, the hurt, the anger, but also the small moments of hope, and I said maybe. Because maybe some wounds could heal with time, maybe some broken things could be fixed with effort, maybe family was complicated, but not impossible, and maybe I was stronger than I thought. We started slow, sending texts, sharing memories, hesitating at first, then opening up about things we never said before. The walls I built around myself cracked a little more with each conversation, with each apology, with each shared laugh, and sometimes tears, sometimes silence, but always trying. He came by my apartment once bringing coffee and a sketchbook. He said he wanted to see my world and maybe be part of it. I showed him my wall, my designs, my plans for the future, and he listened, really listened, like he was trying to understand, not judge, like he wanted to be there, not just because he was family, but because he cared. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't easy, but it was real, and for the first time in a long time I felt like maybe I wasn't alone anymore.